Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Stanley number 340 US3 left-hand wardrobe pivot for flush, recessed, or overlay doors that are 1 1/8 to 1 3/8 thick. This is a pivot set is what it is. And Stanley uses the term wardrobe. I think the term wardrobe is likely a very old term applied to a door type, and I think it's meant to infer the size of a door. So if I tell you that it's an entry door, you have in your head, okay, well, it's probably 3 foot, it's probably this tall, and it's probably thick and heavy. If I tell you a wardrobe door, you're not thinking the same magnitude of door, you're thinking something a bit smaller. And, you know, a wardrobe door is probably going to be thinner. It's probably going to be lighter. It's probably going to be smaller. It's probably going to be used in an application where it might even be close to approaching, you know, cabinetry is what I think they're driving at with the term wardrobe. That's somewhat bolstered by the fact that you are dealing with a pivot that is capable of up to a certain thickness of door and a certain weight of door. And we'll get into that. So this is absolutely a handed set of pivots. This is a left hand. The top and bottoms are different. The top has a removable screw-in thumb screw that's here. A removable thumb screw. And that's got everything to do with how you install the door onto the pivot. The bottom is rigid and fixed. You do have to order lefts and rights because they are indeed handed, because while these parts, they sure look symmetrical, the way they go together is dependent on the top leaf of the top door leaf and the header leaf being separable, that you can pull them apart from each other. The 340 is part of a family of pivots from Stanley, and let's go over that now. First of all, let's look at the product catalog. There's a link below this video to a document called Product Catalog that will allow you to review the 340 pivot along with its sister products. The 340, and you'll want to review these based on how you're installing them. Where do you plan on, or where must you apply the bottom portion in terms of the floor or the jamb, and then the header portion. I might start with reviewing the door thickness capability of the pivot along with the weight capability of the pivot. The 340 and the 341 have identical requirements. The 327 is a much heavier door, and then the 342 is back down to the 75 pounds. So there are 4 of these pivots. First of all, the 327 stands alone because that unit is capable of 150 pounds and a door that's 1 3/4 thick. So if you're doing a heavy door that is heavier than 75 pounds, and a 3070 is going to be heavier than 75 pounds of solid core wood, you'll look at the 327. If the mount type of a 327 does not meet the requirements of how you want to or need to install your pivot hardware, you'll need to look to other manufacturers of pivot hardware. The 340 and the 341 and the 342, for that matter, are essentially the same pivot. What differs is where you attach the pivots to the frame or to the stop, and that's what will define them in terms of being different. The 340 requires a header. It does not require a mullion or a stop of a face on the jamb. The 342 is going to require that. The 341 will partially, the 341 won't require any stop whatsoever, but it's going to require that you mortise the unit to the frame. And you can review the product catalog and see exactly how those differ. So how heavy is your door? Use that to narrow in. How thick is your door? Verify that it's in good shape. Then simply, you know, if you're dealing with 1 3/8 doors that are less than 75 pounds, you've got 3 choices. Then decide how you're going to attach it. For sure, in my experience, the 340 is the most common. The The 342 is uncommon for me anyway. Then the 341 is right behind the 340. That's a nice pivot. I think people should look at the 341 because you don't need any sort of stop whatsoever. You need to have a stop to prevent your door from hyper swinging in the wrong direction, but you don't require one that is going to be integral to the frame. You're not going to require the frame be built as a stopped unit or a single or double rabbited unit. You can have a cased opening frame with that, and then you can provide an auxiliary hardware means by which to stop the door, and that might be attractive to you. The 340, let's jump down to the information in the extended description down below this video. And again, it's classified as a wardrobe pivot. In polished brass, or they say US3, you could also call this 632. US3 does not tell us the base material, but 632 would. It's made of steel with a polished brass finish. US3 is the old US system by which manufacturers would be able to define the finish that they're putting on the hardware, and the user can understand the US number for that and come to expect that manufacturer B and manufacturer A, if they're both using US3, it's the same finish. That you'd have compatibility, because you're not going to have a manufacturer who makes door closers generally make kick plates. Okay? You need to be able to rely on the fact that it's US3 and everything will match. Even though door closers in US3 are relatively uncommon, they're not unheard of. The BHMA, so the US3 is literally the US, United States system that for sure must date to the 1930s. I have old catalogs, and I think I've seen references in old catalogs dating to the 1930s, but at some point in the future I plan to try to narrow down that date as best as I can. But the BHMA, Builders Hardware Manufacturers Association, gives us a better set of definitions by which to classify this. Brass can be done on brass, or it can be done on steel. If it's done on brass, we call it 605. If it's done on steel, we call it 632. The helpful thing for you as someone who's selecting hardware to know that is because the finish between plated over steel and polished solid brass is certainly very compatible at 6 feet away, but when you hold them close to each other, I can tell every time which is the plated version. So it's helpful to know the base material. US3, they also will do this in a US26D satin chrome to get back into the same argument. You might more appropriately call it 652, which means steel, over 626, which means brass. This pivot is going to allow you to go into a flush, which I would call inset, overlay, which is overlay, and then recessed application. And we're going to get to the installation instructions, and we'll call that out. Only pivot of its type for floor to ceiling doors. Well, that's true. With this hardware, you're going to be able to run your door so long so as to really only require a total of about 5/16 of an inch. Don't quote me, we'll get to it. Margin total from your ceiling height to your net door height. So you're going to be able to run it up long. Now, I wouldn't say that it's the only pivot of its type for floor to ceiling doors. There are certainly others, but there are no others in this sort of cost range, that's for sure. Well, actually, they're somewhat true. 1 3/8 doors and more robust pivots are generally something that you have to really look at to see if an 1 3/8 door will work. This is meant for 1 3/8 doors. This door can go to 180 degree. That's certainly true. If there's nothing stopping the door from swinging 180 degree, it will go 180 degree and probably a little bit more. You might have, what I mean is you might have chair rail on the door. You might have base board that's attached. You might have some sort of a crown scenario that, just thinking out loud. You might have some applique. You might have something happening on the door or the wall itself. That would of course be appropriate if you were dealing with a flush or an overlay installation. If it's recessed, you're only going to open the door so far as before it'll hit the outside of the wall. Elongated screws make alignment simple. We'll get to that on the installation instructions. Separable leaves of the top pivot assembly permit fast installation. That's what makes this handed. You've got to be able to remove that. Bushing at the top pivot point assure smooth, silent operation. This is left-handed. When you buy one, you're buying one pair of hinges, one set of pivots. A set is comprised of its top assembly and its bottom assembly, along with its screw package. Okay, let's go to the cut sheet because that's a simple document to take a look at. The cut sheet doesn't do much for us except give us an overview of what we saw in the product catalog. It gives you dimensions, and we're going to go over that in a moment. Okay. I've put on my stronger glasses so I can get a better look at the installation instructions. The scan that we have, it's a bit muddy in some of these dimensions, but we'll clarify it as we go through the installation instructions. So let's start with the installation instructions. You've determined that this pivot will work. It certainly meets the budget. It's a good looking pivot. You don't see very much of it when the door is closed. So step one is defining the terms. You've got overlay, you've got flush or inset, and then you have recessed. And it's obvious what they're driving at here. Any of these applications are fairly common. I think flush is the most common, with recessed probably being second common in terms of situations that I see, with overlay being uncommon. But, you know, nonetheless, depending on what you're doing with the door, an overlay may be exactly what you need to do. Assuming that a flush is the most common thing, where you have a wall and you want that door to be flush with the wall and everything blend in nice together. Corking details that are done on the wall flow through the door. Small moldings that are applied will flow through with literally no mitering required on some real thin moldings that you'd put with this type of hardware. And because this hardware is basically nondescript to begin with, you don't see much of anything other than an outline of a door. And if you're really not paying attention, hey, there's a door there. I didn't see that. So step two gets us into how we're going to install this material. If you're doing an overlay installation, your net height of the door, you know, as long as it's bigger than your opening, you know, and it accommodates your hardware, you don't have to worry about your door having a absolute determined net size in relationship to your finished opening. I said rough opening. It's your finished opening is what it is. A rough opening is what you would put a frame into. A finished opening is what you would put the door into the frame of. So for flush or recessed door application, determine the desired clearance. Usually, and that's where these dimensions are a little bit muddy, usually 1/8 of an inch, I think, is what that's going to say. Back to the telescope. Yeah, usually 1/8 of an inch between hinged side of door and side jamb. So usually 1/8 of an inch. What that means is between the hinge or the pivot style of the door and the jamb, and between the lock style of the door and the jamb, you leave 1/8 of an inch. And generally you have 1/8 of an inch at the header as well. Okay, so from your door opening, you know what you need to undersize your door to now. If it's a 30-inch opening, you know, 9 3/4 square edge. If it's going to be beveled edge, you can get that really to 29 13/16. What they want you to do is best illustrated in step 3, where you can see that dashed line, that vertical dash line. They want you to mark on the face of the stop a dashed line, that 1/8 of an inch, because you're later going to use it to tell you where to place your top pivot assembly. And you'll definitely want that to be there. Mark the clearance with a vertical line on the stop. That's what you got to do. Okay. The minimum recommended stop height is 1.5 inches. So they are expecting at the header you have to have some sort of a stop to accommodate the return on the header portion here. They're recommending 1.5 inch face. You don't need nearly that much, but you are going to need, 1.25 inches for sure, because you don't want those screws to get so close as to split. So, 1.5 inches, yeah, that's going to be overkill. I would say a minimum of 1.25 inches is what I would look at. Now the paragraph in step 2, plywood block at hinge only to accommodate floor leaf. So we're talking about a block of wood that you're going to apply down to the floor that you're going to rest your bottom pivot on. We're going to read it, but understand that you're going to do it only if it's necessary. Block thickness must be 3/4 inch minimum to accommodate the screws. There are 2 lengths of screws. Those longer ones are going to be for the mounting of the hardware to the floor or to the block or to the jamb. The shorter screws will be for the door. Block thickness must be 3/4 inch minimum to accommodate screws if applied over other than wood flooring. Thickness of block should be determined by thickness of carpet or other floor covering and clearance required. Height of door opening from top of plywood block to top of stop, assuming mortised hinges on the door leaves only, equals door height plus 3/8. For non-mortised hinges, door opening height equals door height plus 3/4 from same 2 points. Okay, so if you look in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see a revision date of July of 1975. You're probably not old enough to know what that would mean in terms of carpet, but if you are, then you know why you're going to have a 3/4 inch plywood block. Shag carpeting. Probably not going to apply today. I haven't seen any shag installed in a while. The point of the matter is, if you have a floor condition that you need to build your hardware up off of, then that's what you have to do. Or if you have such an unlevel, if you have a flat floor, it's either tile. It wouldn't, installing this down to tile, you're not going to do that. You're probably going to block that. I don't know that I would place this onto an unlevel floor surface. Or if you have a wood floor and it is so out of level the floor where you need to build the door up to have a greater undercut so as to accommodate that out of level condition when you open the door, you're going to look at that. So the math on the block, if you're using one, is thickness of block should be determined by the thickness of whatever you're accommodating. Whatever you need to kick it up is your thickness of your block. The height of the door opening from top of plywood block to the top of stop, assuming mortised hinges, door leaves only. If you're going to mortise the leaf at the top of the door and at the bottom of the door, that will maximize your door height, which will minimize your margin at the underside of the header to the top of the door and then the bottom of the door to the floor, equals door height plus 3/8. So 3/8 is the number. If you have a finished opening of X and you're going to mortise it and you don't have a block, you're going to deduct 3/8 off of that. That's it. If you're not going to mortise them, you're going to surface mount them, then you got 3/4 inch. You're going to have a greater margin up at the header if you're not mortising them. I would not encourage you to surface mount them, just because if you have 1/8 of an inch on either side and here all of a sudden you've got 5/16 or 3/8 at the top, mortise it. It's a simple procedure. But if you're going to add a block, simply add that to your dimension, to add that to either your 3/8 or your 3/4. That's all you need to do for that. And speaking about that revision date, this hardware has not changed in almost 45 years. Okay, that's a testament to the hardware. Step 6, you've got your vertical dash line. Now you know where you're going to apply your top portion. Well, what they've done is they have separated the two pieces, and it is Yikes. Got it. And it is appropriate for you to do that. Remove that thumb screw. Don't drop it like I did. Separate your two leaves. There's a plastic washer on the door portion. I would probably coax that out to come with. Okay, and that'll be your door portion. So you've got you have got your header portion. Now, you're going to get this installed with your 1/8 of an inch margin. Pardon me, it'll be on this side. 1/8 of an inch margin here. This is going to be butted up to the back of the face of your stop. And what you'll do is you're going to mark your elongated hole and put your screw right down through the center of it. That elongated hole is going to allow this small amount of lateral adjustment eventually. And at that point, you'll have this up in the header. The dimension that they're showing is for the rabbit size is thickness of door plus 1/4 inch. Well, you can tailor that. You know, if you want your doors to be whatever condition you want them to be in, you're going to tailor exactly how deep your rabbit is so that you in effect you have a condition by which your door's in the closed position, and then flush with the wall, and obviously making proper contact with the stop. In step 4, they want you to basically run a plumb bob from this point all the way down so you know exactly where to locate this, because your vertical axis of pivoting needs to be completely compatible, utterly plumb, without any deviation. And what they've basically said they've not said use the screw to attach it. They want you to use a nail to attach the portion into the header, and that would certainly be okay too. You know, if you've got an 1/8 of an inch margin, if that's what you planned on, you're not going to have much lateral requirement movement. So I would just use the screw. Tie a plumb bob down, and then in step 5 is where you're going to position your lower pivot assembly. They do show that block that's there again. Okay. Bottom leaf swung out of the way is how they're showing it here. Plywood block would, they show it just like that. Plywood block here. With the plumb bob centered on the bottom pivot pin, position the floor leaf on the wood block. Mark edges of floor leaf and center of elongated hole. Okay. Remove bottom hinge and drill lead hole for the elongated screw hole. So once you've got it marked in the elongated hole, move it, pre-drill your hole, go back and put it back. Okay. What I meant to say was mark it, pre-drill it. You're not going to leave your hardware attached to the block. You're just marking your locations. You are tracing the location on your plywood block of where you're going to place this. You're going to locate your elongated hole. I would pre-drill the hole for this. Then at that point, you need to attach the hardware to the door, but first you're probably going to be mortising it to the door. And you can see there that the mortise is shown on the hardware. This drawing is showing us an 1 3/8 thick door. Using the loose leaf from the top, we can justify those dimensions. 2.5 inch back. Well, that's the length of the top and bottom leaf for that matter. They are They are the same stamping, so they're going to be utterly the same size. Okay. They want 1 inch on the face of the door for the pivot to extend out. That's correct. They've got a 15/16 depth prep, which is correct as again. You're going to mortise to the back of your door as shown. You're going to mortise all the way to the outside. The thickness of the leaf, I don't know that they give that. They must give that to us here. Let's take a look. My caliper is telling me it's 129 thousandths, so basically 1/8 of an inch. Just a little heavy. So you'll mortise it so that it's flush. Top of door mortise as shown on top and bottom of door if minimum clearance is desired. Mortising may be eliminated if an approximate 3/8 of an inch additional clearance is acceptable. Okay. If they're in-swing doors, which they wouldn't be, you may not care so much about that, but they're probably outswing. Bottom door leaf, apply flush with inside corner of the door. An interesting point about that is you have to put a small radius or a chamfer as shown. That will be 2.5 inch long. The door is going to sit in here. This inside bend, that's not a perfect square there. There is a radius in there. So you have to relieve the bottom of the door so that it sits tight in that crotch or the corner of the hinge. You're going to mark your elongated hole. At this point, it's going to be a good idea to get the hardware physically attached to the door through your elongated holes. This is going to be completely on the bottom of the door, just like this. This will be attached down to the top of the door completely. At that point, once you have this all attached through your elongated holes, your door is going to have all of this attached. Up in the header is going to be this piece. At that point, they do say to go ahead and in step 7, drill that hole for the elongated screw and then fix that permanently, because at that point you are ready to hang the door. Going back to that tack nail in step 4, holding the pivot in place, you know, they're trying to establish a vertical axis of pivoting. You know, whether you use the screw or the nail, you're going to be very, very close because of where you're starting with that top pivot hardware. Get the top portion attached with a screw through the elongated hole. Then step 8 is basically pick the door up, place it down onto the floor or your block. You're going to need to get that screw attached down in there as soon as you tip this. Oh, forgive me, I've actually done that backwards. With the top and bottom door leaves attached to the door in the open position, fit the door in the opening as follows. The first thing you do is insert the top door leaf on the pivot pin of the door stop. So you're going to get these two pieces to come together. Okay. Door's got the hardware. Get it into the top pivot pin as I just established. Then rest it down on the floor or the block. And at that point, you'll be able to swing the door to the, you know, almost 90-degree position and place your bottom pivot, mark your holes, pre-drill your holes, secure that down. This is already secure with this hole. Don't do this hole just yet. Elongated hole, elongated hole. Same up at the top of the door. Got your elongated hole in the header. You've got this elongated hole. At that point, what you realize is you're going to be able to shift the door hardware and the door laterally to account for any adjustments that you need. Same with the bottom portion. You'll be able to adjust it on your block or your floor, and then of course on your door as well. Once you have it perfectly positioned, then drill your fixed holes and install the screws. Step 8, insert top pivot pin, slide the bottom corner of the door onto the wood block or the marked location. Step 9, position floor leaf on the markings previously drawn on wood block. Apply a screw through the elongated hole only. Don't fully tighten. Make the final adjustments if necessary by tapping the leaves that have elongated holes. Apply remaining rubber mallet. Just tap everything to move it. Apply remaining screws. Tighten all screws and apply cylindrical safety lock nut to complete the installation. Safety nut must seat unthreaded portion of pivot to ensure secure installation. And they don't want the door to make any contact with this at all, because what can happen is over time, if the door is touching it, every time you open the door, you'll actually work to probably potentially loosen this or to render it inoperative. So your door cannot get close to that pivot point. Well, it can't touch it is the bottom line. And you can see that's where your 1 3/8 door thickness is going to come into play. You're going to be able to have adequate room for that. You're actually going to be closer to the dimension there. 1 3/8, 1 1/8. Okay, so that pivot's going to stand out proud of your opening by from the face of the stop all the way out to about 2 3/8. Okay, so you'll lay out exactly what your rabbit's going to be. You know, they're saying 1/4 inch added to your door thickness for that dimension. And that concludes how you're going to install this. Very easy equipment to install. You really just need to size the door correctly, and that's very clearly laid out in the installation instructions. People like these pivots because they are time-tested and true. They're inexpensive. They're effective. They work. They're generally kept in stock. It's hardware that's seen. It's familiar to people. They understand how it works. The name Stanley is, of course, ubiquitous in the hardware industry. And would certainly recommend that this pivot hardware be looked at. I do get calls from people all the time that says, yeah, I need some pivots, but boy, I don't want to spend that much money. Okay, let's see if the Stanley line of pivots will accommodate. And in lots of instances, it doesn't. And in lots of instances, it does. So take a good look at it. Any questions on the Stanley? This is their 340 in a left-hand orientation and a polished brass finish, or any other Stanley product. Please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you.